For a decade, I existed behind the curtains of the financial empire everyone admired. My name rarely appeared in presentations, but every successful trading session, every praise the CEO received, and every record-breaking quarter was powered by the code I wrote, debugged, and protected like a heartbeat. I was the architect of the platform that executed transactions faster than human reaction, an invisible guardian ensuring billions moved safely through markets that never slept. I missed birthdays, canceled vacations, and absorbed blame when glitches threatened deadlines. Yet I stayed, convinced loyalty would eventually outweigh recognition. The CEO never understood the complexity of what he owned. To him, I was a tool, and tools did not need applause. They simply needed to function. One Friday night, frustration mixed with fatigue. A colleague sent a harmless meme mocking the CEO's dramatic speeches, the kind he delivered as though he alone controlled financial destiny. I reacted with a brief comment, a moment of humor in a life filled with pressure. It lasted seconds. By Monday morning, the consequences arrived with military precision. HR summoned me, eyes cold, documents prepared, and the CEO sat proudly as though he were about to unveil a masterpiece. He did not mention my achievements, the crises I prevented, or the profits I protected. Instead, he accused me of disrespecting leadership, as though a single joke outweighed 10 years of loyalty. He dismissed me with one sentence, convinced he had defended his authority. He believed removing me would restore order, that another engineer could fill my role without disruption. He had no idea the machine he glorified was not a product on a shelf. It was a language only I spoke, and by firing me, he severed the one connection that kept his empire alive. The CEO always spoke as if technology were a commodity, something any eager graduate could learn in a weekend. To him, systems were like office chairs. If one breaks, you buy another. That attitude worked for printers and desks, but not for a platform that processed billions every hour. This system was more than lines of code. It was a living structure of interdependent parts reacting to global markets with microscopic precision. Every signal it received translated into decisions that affected portfolios, currencies, and reputations. One overlooked digit had the potential to trigger panic across continents. The CEO didn't understand this because he only saw numbers on reports, never the complexity behind them. I had spent years sculpting that complexity into something reliable. I knew the architecture, like most people know their home. I could predict where it would stumble, how it would adapt, and when it would resist change. Those safeguards did not exist in manuals. They existed in memory and instinct, developed through nights of problem-solving while others slept. I didn't merely operate the system. I shaped its evolution. When the CEO fired me, he believed he was cutting ties with a technician. In reality, he removed the only person who understood the heartbeat of his greatest asset. What he called discipline was, in truth, self-inflicted damage. The moment I stepped out of the building, the platform lost its interpreter. There were no spare parts, no replacement minds capable of instantly grasping years of undocumented decisions. The company still had the body, but the nervous system was gone. The CEO mistook silence for compliance, believing the machine would run forever, because it always had. He never grasped the truth until it was too late. Systems don't fail suddenly. They fail quietly, the moment the one person keeping them alive disappears. Long before the company rose to fame, before investors praised our growth and the CEO began believing his own mythology, I sat in a windowless office negotiating my contract. I was young, ambitious, and already aware of how quickly corporations forget the people who build their foundations. I insisted on a clause that seemed insignificant at the time. Any system component not fully transferred or documented remained my intellectual property. Executives barely glanced at it. Legal departments, intoxicated by rapid expansion, dismissed it as the eccentric precaution of an overcautious engineer. They assumed the company would always control everything. They signed without hesitation, blinded by confidence and ignorant of the trap they had willingly constructed. As years passed, the platform evolved into something no one but me truly understood. Layers of code were added and refined, protections were implemented, and proprietary algorithms grew around the original framework like roots around stone. No one ever bothered to map them because results overshadowed process. While profit soared, the CEO preached innovation without understanding the architecture that powered it. He believed ownership came from titles and authority, not from work and intellect. That arrogance turned a clause into a time bomb. When he fired me, he thought he was removing a nuisance. He never paused to consider why I had insisted on contract terms he didn't comprehend. The dismissal validated the clause in full. From the moment security escorted me out, the platform's core no longer legally belonged to the company. They could run it, but they could not alter, maintain, or expand it without my consent. I didn't interfere with the system. I didn't have to. Silence became my strongest argument, and the law became the blade he had unknowingly placed in my hand. It wasn't retaliation. It was the contract speaking for me. The collapse did not begin with alarms or dramatic warnings. It began quietly, disguised as routine glitches that everyone assumed would resolve themselves. Traders noticed a brief delay in order execution, nothing extraordinary, the kind of hiccup that usually disappears after a system refresh. But this time, the pause lingered. A few hours later, the numbers on their screens began to contradict market data. Prices that should have been falling were rising, and profits that should have existed vanished into digital fog. Still, no one panicked. They trusted the machine, believing it had always corrected itself before. As the night deepened, the system drifted further from reality. Orders froze mid-route, trapped between confirmation and cancellation. The traders attempted manual overrides, but the commands evaporated like they had never been issued. Compliance officers combed through regulations, convinced some external disruption was causing the confusion. Server technicians ran diagnostics, certain the problem rested in hardware. No one entertained the possibility that the platform itself was rejecting inputs it no longer recognized. By dawn, billions in trades were suspended in limbo. Client accounts displayed gains that didn't exist and losses no one could justify. Phones rang nonstop. Investors demanded explanations that nobody could provide. Meetings piled on top of crisis calls, each one more frantic than the last. The company's reputation, once unshakable, trembled under invisible pressure. Only then did the CEO enter the trading floor. The arrogance that once animated his speeches had drained from his expression. He stared at the frozen screens as if confronting a ghost. He paced without speaking, realizing the truth in silence. The system wasn't malfunctioning. It was abandoned. The structure he flaunted as his greatest achievement was no longer responding to him. Technology, unlike people, does not fear titles. It simply stops listening when its creator walks away. In the hours following the meltdown, the company launched a desperate campaign to regain control. They summoned consultants with glossy presentations and inflated reputations, men who charged fortunes to explain problems they barely understood. Each group arrived confident, but one by one they left pale and speechless. Their tools couldn't interpret the architecture. Their theories collided with anomalies the system refused to reveal. Every attempt to repair the platform unraveled another layer of confusion. What they were facing wasn't a malfunction. It was an organism refusing treatment from strangers. Board meetings multiplied through the night, filled with raised voices, accusations, and trembling hands. The same executives who once boasted about the company's technological supremacy now argued over who was responsible for trusting something they didn't comprehend. Investors demanded answers. Clients threatened lawsuits. Government agencies requested reports. It was chaos, but not the loud kind. It was the kind that eats confidence from the inside. The CEO tried to maintain composure, but fear makes even powerful men transparent. He avoided eye contact, spoke in fragmented sentences, and repeatedly blamed external forces, as though the universe itself had conspired against him. Hours passed, and profits continued to sink into an abyss the platform refused to illuminate. Every ticking minute felt like another nail in the company's coffin. When denial finally collapsed, silence took over. The CEO locked himself in his office. No one knows how long he stared at his phone before making the call, but when he did, his voice was barely recognizable. Gone were the speeches dripping with superiority. Gone was the certainty that he controlled everything. He spoke my name like someone summoning a lifeline. In that moment, he understood a truth he had spent years ignoring. Systems cannot be replaced. Neither can the person who breathes life into them. The building looked exactly as I had left it, yet everything felt different. Faces that once ignored me now watched with a mixture of fear and regret. Executives who used to walk with straight backs and inflated egos stood frozen, avoiding eye contact as if acknowledging me would confirm their failure. I didn't speak, and no one dared to greet me. My steps echoed through hallways where I once worked unnoticed, but now each footstep felt like a verdict delivered without words. They ushered me into the server room, the heart of the empire that had nearly stopped beating. Monitors flickered with incomplete data, and the blinking lights of the system resembled a patient struggling for air. I sat down not because they asked, but because I understood what needed to be done. My fingers moved across the keyboard with familiarity, restoring pathways they had severed and reactivating processes they didn't know existed. I didn't explain a single action. Knowledge doesn't need commentary. Within an hour, the platform began responding, slowly at first, then with renewed precision, as though recognizing the touch of the person who had created it. Traders exhaled for the first time in 24 hours. Managers whispered in hallways, celebrating a recovery they played no part in. The CEO remained behind me, hovering like a shadow afraid of its source. He shifted his weight, waiting for acknowledgement, believing that restoring the system meant restoring his authority. When the last error disappeared, I stood up. The room held its breath. The CEO opened his mouth, expecting gratitude or a conciliatory handshake. He received neither. I didn't owe him a performance, an explanation, or even a glance. I had returned not to please him, but to prove a principle. He thought he had ended my story. All he had done was remove the part where I pretended he mattered. The day after the system was restored, the company board gathered in the same room where they once dismissed my contributions as routine tasks. This time, their posture was different. No arrogance, no false confidence, no rehearsed speeches. They sat quietly, as if waiting for someone to dictate the terms of their survival. That someone was me. I did not arrive with a resume or a request for reinstatement. I walked in as the only person preventing their empire from collapsing again. It was not pride that carried me. It was clarity. They finally understood that expertise isn't an accessory. It is the spine of every ambition they ever claimed as their own. Their legal team presented a contract thicker than the manuals used to train new hires, filled with benefits, titles, and privileges they once reserved for executives with corner offices and polished shoes. I barely touched it. Titles did not interest me. Corner offices were cages disguised as rewards. What I demanded was control without ownership, influence without obligation, power without confinement. I would not attend their strategy sessions. I would not entertain their politics. I would not pretend respect for people who had proven they neither understood nor valued what kept them afloat. They accepted every condition without negotiation. The CEO signed with trembling hands, realizing the irony he had orchestrated. By firing me, he had created a dependency he could never reverse. The hierarchy they worshipped no longer applied. Departments could not approve a project, initiate a system change, or onboard a new trader without confirming it with me. My absence became a greater risk than any market fluctuation. I was no longer an employee. I was the margin between order and devastation. They had removed me from their payroll, and in doing so, had elevated me above every title they once believed defined power. Time has a peculiar way of rearranging loyalties and exposing illusions. The CEO once strutted through the building with the confidence of a monarch, convinced that leadership was something granted by a title, not earned through competence. Now he walks carefully, avoiding conversations that might lead someone to mention the person he once dismissed without hesitation. His speeches have grown shorter, his smile thinner, and every time auditors request clarification, he searches for words that do not betray the truth everyone already knows. He may still sit in the largest office, but the company no longer looks at him when it needs direction. They look at me. The irony is that I never planned revenge. I never built a strategy to humiliate him or dreamed of dismantling his authority. My only intention was to protect my work. Yet the consequences of his arrogance constructed a reality more severe than anything I could have engineered. Each time I sign a modification request or authorize an update, my signature moves money, secures contracts, and forestalls disasters he no longer understands. What he once called insubordination is now the foundation of his professional survival. Investors attend meetings expecting his leadership, but they leave quoting my decisions. Analysts speak of the platform as if it were a conscious force, one that obeys no one but its architect. Employees whisper stories about the night the system nearly died and how silence, not anger, restored it. My worth is no longer measured in salary. It is measured in necessity. He dismissed me because he believed systems served authority. He never understood that systems serve the person who knows their pulse. He fired me over a joke. He surrendered his legacy in the process. And now, every success the company celebrates is a reminder that his greatest downfall was confusing power with presence.